Recording has begun. Welcome, everybody. This is the 8th community call for the Informatics for Community Food Resilience Project. I'm so thankful that you have all managed to stay with us. And so I'm going to share my screen because I have a couple of different updates that I'd like to share with the full group. And thank you for those of you who've been coming to different working groups in the last couple of months. I think you'll recognize some of your own work being shared today as in our updates for the meeting. So you should be able to see my screen now. And with that, I will start off these notes here. Okay, so today I'll do a little quick project refresh and give you a status update on the 3 working groups that we have currently going. I'll give you a sense of what we're thinking for phase 2 of the project also. And then we'll have our usual open time for community discussion at the end, which will be unrecorded. And so hopefully that allows for us to be able to both look over what we've done so far and then maybe even have a quick chat about what comes next. And for those of you who are watching later, the notes for this meeting will also be available, and so will these slides. So if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you go to the website because you'll be able to see all of that information over there. Okay, you've probably seen the website go through a couple of different changes. One of the major things that we've done is that we have moved to monthly meetings just because we have all of the different working groups going on. And so I think it just ended up being a few too many meetings. That allows for us to focus on the work itself and be able to then provide the community at large with a sense of what we've accomplished each month. And so the information should all be on the site. So if you're looking at any of the slides today and want to read any of the things that we've got, I've got links to the different parts of the website that have information about it. So just a quick refresh of what we were planning on doing. We had 4 objectives in our original concept paper way back in March, April, that detailed these 4 phases of the project, with the first really being understanding the roadblocks in the community food landscape. And so now we have each of the groups that are actively working on these 3 areas. And so I wanted to share with you sort of the progress that's been made on each of these. And as we're beginning to get some preliminary results, we've also started sort of having a little bit of a think about phase 2, which involves thinking about the design of those local food toolkits and perhaps even building a couple of things. So this is sort of, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on sort of the journey that we've come on together. So in March, I had written the concept paper, and on the 15th of April is when we had our first community call. And that month was really focused around getting the qualitative study out to the community and getting a lot of input on what we had proposed we would do. And so I thank you all who have been with us since April, who have been able to provide input into those early pieces. May was really focused on kicking off each of the working groups. And so we staggered them. First, the qualitative research study was kicked off, although the group for that had already been formed. After that, we kicked off the software for local foods team. And then finally, we kicked off the community food pathways team. And you'll see some of the work that's been going on in each of those shortly. And then in June is when we switched to the monthly updates. And so the June 3rd update was pretty quick. So today you'll mostly hear a lot of the work that was done in June. So then a little bit of a sense of what comes down the pipeline. As we're beginning to sort of have a couple of different pieces wrap up and a couple of different pieces be a little bit more detailed, we're beginning to have some preliminary results that we might want to share. And so we will continue Farm Supporter and actually start farmer interviews in July and August. We will begin to tie off some of the software evaluation process. We'll try to synthesize some of these preliminary results from phase 1. And then closer towards the end of August, we will try to kick off both the community mapping pilot as well as a design team for a pilot project. So that way we can spend fall with a couple of these actual doing projects in process, doing activities in progress, while on the planning side, we slow down a little bit for reflection and trying to think about actually funding, because fun story, we are all still very much a volunteer team. So thank you to the folks on this next slide, who have been contributing their time to this project. So we're now a pretty big leadership team for the Resilient Food Project as a whole, with the 3 different working groups here. And so you'll see, Juliet and I are part of all of the different groups, but then we have Tamara, Andrew, and Michael in the qualitative research team, Gigi, Abigail, Colleen, and Eric in the community food pathways team, Sarah, Jamie, Ben, and Mike in the software for local foods team. So thank you once again for all of the contributions that you've been making to the group so far. And hopefully as we start to move towards the end of the year, we can start to think about how to now turn this into something that we can maybe do in a little bit more of a structured fashion from here on out. So the project goals, just as a quick refresh again, was, our short-term goal was to be able to understand community food system challenges, to be able to inform the design of tools and processes, and then specify technologies that need to be built or make recommendations of what is needed or desired for community food resilience, with our overall goal really trying to be to think about these local food toolkits that we can put together and actually use in coordinating local food within our communities. So now I'll just start a couple of quick status updates for each of those working groups. In June, primarily, we had 6 interviews with farm supporters. These were all done remotely. We covered 3 regions, although it was primarily from the Midwest. I would say Midwest and Pacific West heavy. I think we only had 1 participant from the Northeast. But folks were from a variety of different backgrounds. So we had community organizers, food hub coordinators, farm advocacy group reps, local food buyers, writers, and researchers, with several folks multi-classing in between. And then in the meantime, we've also been attending a variety of different, I'm calling them pandemic webinars, which is just basically #Zoom Life, which involves us turning up to, extension talks and a lot of the different advocacy group talks to hear and learn from the broader community about what types of challenges people have been experiencing. And so, at least for me, one of the reasons why I thought it was valuable to note that is because I've been learning a lot from hearing about the experiences of farmers with different technologies, or of the different communities with a variety of equity issues. And all of these, I think, are valuable stories from the broader community that should inform the work that we're doing. So that's why I wanted to just at least flag that as something. And thank you for everybody who's actually been sending me information about all these webinars. I think it's important for us to be able to, have that community. And so consider this a continued open invitation to send me links to things to go listen to. Outside of that, we also have finally resolved the gift card issue. Hooray. So farmer interviews can start. We have folks who have been signed up for quite a while. So if you are somebody who has signed up, you are a farmer who has signed up for an interview and have not been scheduled yet, I thank you eternally for your patience, and we will be able to now finally get that underway. And so that is just a very quick status of where we are at the qualitative research study. And if you want to keep track of this, you can check out the link below. I wanted to also give you a little bit of a sense of what's actually happening in these. So Andrew and Juliet and I have been primarily running these interviews. So I believe they're both on the call. So if you have specific questions, you can direct them to any of us during the open discussion time. But some of the types of things that we've been talking about have been, for instance, thinking about the effects of COVID on local food systems. We've been talking about what different kinds of tools people are using, or when they're not using technology as well, and also trying to do some basic mapping of information flows within different people's communities. And so again, the folks that we've been speaking to are farm supporters. So the perspectives that we've been hearing have been primarily from people who are trying to coordinate food within local communities, not necessarily growing it, though they do work with a variety of both farmers and consumers. And so this is just a little bit of a glimpse of what we've been doing, and we will be synthesizing some of these as preliminary results as we get closer to a time that allows for that. The second working group has been focused around software for local foods. For those of you who are here early in the call, you would have heard me chatting with Jean about the fact that we now have 52 tools inside the library, we started to categorize these under a variety of things. So, we have everything from farm management tools like FarmOS, CSA tools like Harvey, food aggregation tools like the Open Food Network, and a variety of other pieces in our the Resilient Foods library. So you're also welcome to contribute tools that you see there. We will be evaluating each of these, or not necessarily each of these, because we have a small process that we're going to use to actually trim down the list a little bit. So we'll actually be evaluating the best of each categories, a couple of best of each category, with respect to a variety of different variables from, how well do they perform in different regions? What do they support with respect to distribution and customers and sales models? We'll be thinking about usability. And so the software group has been meeting weekly, I believe, to be able to actually nail down some of these variables. In the last 2 weeks, we've actually been doing some user journey mapping, where we've been trying to actually think about how, and we started with the farmer coordinator. Next week, we're going to be doing the farmer journey map, and then we'll finally end with the consumer one, just trying to track how information is flowing from farm to fork. So that way we can start to be able to use that as a way to motivate each of those evaluation criteria that we have listed above. So that's just a little quick update on what the software group is up to. If you want more information on this group, again, there's the link below, and you should be able to at least keep track of what we're doing and get involved if you get super excited about this. The last piece that we have active right now is on mapping community food pathways. Right now, we have a group that is focused on actually establishing the initial mapping process. And so this was the last group to get kicked off, so it's in the earliest stages. But Juliet's been leading the group in trying to develop this process with a focus on analyzing first the 26 existing food maps, because lots of different folks have already created a variety of food maps, but trying to determine the genres of things that are represented in these different food maps. And so what we're really trying to get a better sense of is what types of information are people actually interested in representing in both conceptual and geographic maps of local food communities. And so again, if you're very excited about this particular topic, you're welcome to follow the link at the bottom or reach out if you want to get involved in that particular part of the project. So I did say it was going to be fairly brief from an updates perspective, because I want to make sure that we have time to chat about each of the different pieces. But I wanted to at least open up the discussion with talking about some of the opportunities for design that at least I've seen from each of the different groups. And so the first one, I wish I ordered these from Farm to Fork, but it actually goes beyond that. But one of the things that we're hoping to do is to try to think about which one of these might be a useful low-hanging fruit that is both urgent and important, but also something that we can really just start to work on as part of one of those design projects for the next phase of the project. And so the different categories that we have are up on the screen. So I'll just start from the top. We've heard a lot about folks talking about food rescue. So this includes keeping food out of the waste stream, but also in particular trying to think about how we can actually take food from places where there's an oversupply and bring them to communities in need. I think this is a really interesting project, but this has a lot of really interesting potential, because it means that we would be able to actually start to think about maybe some coordination tools, but then also some community processes that might need some support. And so I think this is a pretty rich space for us to be able to explore, but I wanted to put that as at least one bucket of things to think about. The second was on food access. This is really focused and I think inspired by a lot of the discussions that we've heard around SNAP and EBT. So, what are some mechanisms for low-income online food purchasing? I think a lot of the tools that we have seen do not necessarily support this. And so I think this is something that has been definitely in our minds from the very beginning, but I wanted to provide that as an example of maybe one opportunity for design when thinking about food access. More recently, I think especially with the sort of the Black Lives Matter movement right now that we're seeing, the crises that are happening in that front, we thought the pandemic was going to end, but it didn't really, and the next crisis started. And so one of the things that I think, at least in a lot of the conversations that we've been having, have been around food equity and trying to think about how can we actually start to bring some of the challenges that we see in different communities together to be able to then have a slightly more aligned approach to supporting diverse eaters and growers. And so one of the things that at least I've been thinking about is being able to even couch some of the community food pathways work in terms of food equity. So not just focusing on your community because of convenience, but even trying to think a little bit more broadly about how do we map local food communities specifically to be able to cater to diverse eaters and growers, people who are in places that are food deserts or people who are parts of different communities that are typically underserved. And so trying to even really guide that work focused towards being able to support food equity, which I think also is related to a couple of the other pieces. But I just wanted to flag that as another area that we might want to be able to dig into. More on the logistics side would be the next three of distribution, processing, and sales. We've been hearing a lot from people in each of the working groups, but also in the interviews and in the broader community about the need for efficient routing and distribution of local foods, specifically in that last mile. And yes, most local foods are ideally within that mile, but we tend to see something anywhere from like a 50-mile to 150-mile radius as sort of what people are using as the scope for local foods. And so that last mile really does become a very tricky space, I think, especially because of the role that different types of delivery services have been wanting to play. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had around what appropriate technologies look like for trying to handle food distribution in the local foods context. Related, at least from a logistics perspective, are some challenges that we've been hearing around food processing. Technology is not going to result in necessarily the problem being solved, but I think there are a couple of opportunities where we might be able to use technology to be able to assist in food processing challenges. For example, in scheduling and coordinating. So at the end of the day, it is a complex scheduling problem, and that's the type of thing that a computer handles pretty well. Similarly, I think, we might be able to use some of the work being done, for example, with the Community Food Pathways Group, to be able to identify areas where maybe there are clusters of farms, and maybe then that's one way for us to say, well, here might be an ideal location for this type of processing facility to be promoted. And so there are relationships between sort of things that we might be able to do on that end and even the food policy quadrant that we have in the corner. So, thinking about not just the implications on design and the choice of digital tools, but then also thinking about the potential repercussions or the potential ways in which technology can help us then provide evidence for data-driven policymaking. So I guess I've covered that one, so I won't come back to that one, and I'll just switch over to food sales over here. This, I think, is, again, related a little bit to food access, but here I was specifically thinking about improved management of variable food packages and alternative sales models. So a fun example that I think recently came up in the software team meeting was even just thinking about how different kinds of digital tools support variable weight packaging, right? So you have meat that's packaged in different weights, and oftentimes your online tools will only support, for example, a unit. And so the way in which units and weights and prices then get traced becomes a little bit of a tricky game to play that ends up with, potentially somebody accidentally buying 16 pounds of something as opposed to 4 pounds or a single unit of something. And so that's a fairly specific example, but I think it's exemplary of the broader range of challenges within sort of thinking about point of sales and different kinds of challenges with existing tooling from that perspective. Similarly, as we hear more and more stories from folks about the way in which they're using technology in coordinating local food, we notice that, there aren't actually like 5 discrete ways of selling food or coordinating food or distributing food within a local food system. There are lots and lots of different ways, which means that not all tools are able to capture that nuance. And so the pickle becomes, how do you actually have a discrete set of tools that serve specific purposes really well, while also still being customizable or flexible enough for people to be able to deal with all of the variations of the way in which their local community has chosen to distribute food. And so that's another area that we thought was ripe for thinking when it comes to the next phase of this work. And then the last one I think is the most is the most sort of technologically solvable, because it just requires import export between different tools. But we've heard a lot of folks talk about the need for integrations among food tools from farm to fork. And so this can be as simple as making sure that your farm management software can feed your sales software, or your, feed into your social media. So that way you don't have to necessarily like create catalogs from scratch every time. But I think one of the challenges here is that what ends up happening is that because of the plethora of tools that we have within sort of generally the ag landscape, it means that people's data ends up having to get entered and re-entered in different places. And now all of a sudden we're introducing work instead of reducing work when through technology. And so I think there are a lot of fairly basic things that we could do to be able to support food data flow with respect to thinking about integrations among specific food tools. Okay, so that was a lot of different opportunities for design. I just wanted to at least lay out the landscape and be able to at least provide you with a variety of different things that are available. I'll bring this slide back up so that we can chat during the open discussion time. And from here, I'm just going to like give a couple of quick notes for folks who are listening to the recording later, so that way you can continue to stay as involved in the discussion. So if you are interested in getting involved with the design teams, we will be picking a project to focus on this fall, so it'll be a very specific piece. So if you'd like to be notified about this specifically, contact me and Juliet, and we'll make sure that you get that information. If you are a farmer or farm supporter and have not yet signed up for an interview, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to sign up for an interview, and we will call you to schedule a time, and there's some more information about how that process will flow. If you haven't yet tweeted or shared information about this project, please feel free to spread the word. There are some shareable links available for you to share with your community so that we can hear more from people that you think are awesome and have interesting perspectives to share. And then a quick reminder that we do still have the Food and Tech Community Library available. And so if you do have resources that you come across or think are interesting, please feel free to submit a resource via that link. And with that, I think I will end the recorded part of this discussion and open it up for the unrecorded community discussion. So thank you everyone who's listening online. We'll see you next month. I'm going to stop the recording.